Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. For those of you who are listening, I was broadcasting live. I had some sort of technical issue, not even entirely sure what happened or why this occurred. Can't figure it out. So there's one for the unexplained files, I suppose. So I'm re-releasing the content in the podcast form as well as providing the end of the show. I apologize for any inconvenience for all those who listen live. A few announcements. First off, I just want to thank everybody for their support of the show. This last week, for those of you who follow the show on social media, this was a record-breaking week for the show. More listeners than I've ever had. So I'm really excited about that, and I owe that to all of you who have joined the show and have listened and have been around for a little while, and for all the new listeners that seem to have jumped aboard this week, largely in part to the show now being available on Stitcher Radio. Stitcher is a on-demand service, and it has apps available for the iPhone, Android devices, so feel free to download the Stitcher app and you can listen to the show on Stitcher. So really excited to be part of Stitcher now, and hopefully be able to get an even greater audience. So thank you to all those who have joined in, and I'm excited about some of the different things in the direction I'm going to take this show. Couple announcements here. First off, for those of you who don't follow the show on social media, I would urge that you do. I like to post a lot of updates about the show as well as upcoming topics and other things that I have planned. So check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, all that good stuff. Also, on the social media, I announced last night I'm going to be hosting a live chat at the show's website tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you have any questions, comments, things you want to talk about, the unexplained, the paranormal, I'm going to be on there at 7 p.m. Eastern Saturday night. So tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, go to the show's website, Web of Conspiracy, that's 2 B's, all one word, .wix.com /Web of Conspiracy. So check that out. I'll be on there. If you can't join live, jump into the chat room, leave a question, comment, and I'll get to it when I jump in there. But you can either log in with Facebook or Twitter, or you can just leave log in as a guest. So you can be as anonymous as you want to be. If you have any questions, comments, or anything that you'd like to talk about the show, about the topics we discuss on the show, I'm really excited, and I would hope to be able to talk to at least a few of you in the chat room. So check that out Saturday night, tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern. So yes, and that's the other thing too. I'm working on doing some different things on the show's website. I'm going to try to expand that, kind of do a little more with it when I've been able to do. This is a one-person show. I do all the production and all the social media management. All this I do on my own. So bear with me when things happen, because it is a one-man gig, and sometimes, like when trying to broadcast earlier live, I don't understand what happened, so I'm going to work to figure that out. It's happened to me only one other time, and so I've learned from this, and I'm going to continue to go forward and try to figure out what's going on there. So once again, check that stuff out, and I tend to be slow go with the website, but I've got some things I'm working on there. So feel free tomorrow night to check it out, and any questions or comments. And also, on the website, if you don't want to leave something in the forum, there's a private contact form. You can submit it there to me. You can direct email me at webofconspiracy@gmail.com. Any questions, comments, things you want to talk about. If you want to share your own experiences, that's what I really enjoy, as I really want to get a lot more personal experiences from individuals. I want to know, if you've had some kind of strange incident happen. That was always my inspiration in starting this show, was that, to be able to kind of bring some of these things out a little bit more into the mainstream and have an open discussion without passing judgment on individuals, and be able to kind of, figure out what's going on in some of this strange phenomena. So, by all means, reach out any way that you like, but I will be in the chat room tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern. So, today's topic is one that I think has been, it's one of the most fascinating to me, and there's a number of reasons for that being the case. It's an incident where there's a lot of potential conventional explanation, at least there's some. However, there's pieces of information and bits that just don't quite add up, and there's things that are left behind that don't really meet a logical explanation. So that's why this Dyatlov Pass incident is so fascinating to me. Now, I'm going to provide a bit of backstory. I know there's probably a few of you who are listening who have heard of this, that are even familiar with it. But for those of you who aren't, I'm going to provide you some backstory so you can understand just how compelling and how unusual this is. Now, this all starts on January 23rd, 1959. Now, before I go too much further, a little caveat here. Now, the incidents here that I'm going to talk to you about, what we know is what was left behind primarily through diaries and pictures that the group had taken that were later found and discovered by the search and rescue teams. So, in determining the fate of the individuals in this group, this is what we have. And then we also have what reports were not destroyed by government officials after the fact. So it's a lot of piecing together bits and pieces of information, and that's why there's so much mystery about what happened here. On January 23rd, 1959, a group of 10 ski hikers, went on an expedition into the Ural Mountains of Russia. Keep in mind, 1959, we're not Russia, we're talking about Soviet Union. This group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, who was an expert mountain climber and cross-country skier. So this was a guy who, even being young, but was well respected in terms of knowing how to handle these kinds of conditions. Of course, it's middle of winter in the heart of Russia. It's not going to be ideal, pleasant conditions. 30-degree below temperatures were pretty common. So the polar vortex that the United States has been dealing with in much of the northern and eastern U.S., that's just for a couple days. I mean, these were pretty well sustained conditions in this part of Russia this time of the season. So this group, however, it wasn't all that unusual. I mean, when you live in an area for so long, you begin to adapt to the conditions, and you learn how to live and how to survive and how to dress and do those things. And that's essentially what is believed, that most of these individuals felt comfortable with. Now, they actually went out and started the expedition on the 27th. 4 days later is when they left. And on the 28th, the 10th member of the group, Yuri Yudin, became ill and decided that he was going to turn back. What a great time to get ill. Because it saved his life. He would ultimately be the only survivor of the group. And the early days of that expedition, or what we've gathered, has been mostly from his testimony. Now, he turns back. The rest of the group goes forward. The remaining 9 arrive on January 31st. They arrive at the Auspion River, and they begin climbing the pass to ascend the Otorten Mountain in the Ural Mountains, and that was their ultimate goal. And while they were attempting to ascend this mountain, the conditions worsened dramatically. It was, what we've been able to gather, it was visibility was next to nothing. Conditions got so treacherous that they could not continue forward up the mountain. So they set up camp. Now, it's believed, based on testimony from people who came later, that if they had maybe moved into a different, they were very close to a place that perhaps they could have had a little more heat and a little more shelter and wouldn't have been exposed. Where they had set up camp was a little more exposed. And there are conflicting reports about the compass issues in the area. In other words, there were claims that between the low visibilities and these compasses not functioning properly in the area, that they became so disoriented, they were really unable and unsure of where they were supposed to go. So this group sets up this base camp in a place that is not the safest, is not ultimately a safe place, and this is what we last, and at this point, this is the last that we know of their journey in terms of what they left behind in diaries and things of that nature and pictures. Now, the group was supposed to have returned on February 12th. They did not, obviously. And the individuals who were expecting them, they didn't get too alarmed. This was not unlike Dyatlov to maybe take a little longer out there. Very comfortable, very skilled individual in the wilderness and in the mountains and in the weather conditions. Nobody became immediately overly alarmed. As I said, this is part of daily life in the middle of winter in that part of the world. So you learn to adapt and you learn to adjust, and you believe, okay, well, this is just they're taking extra time. However, when the group did not return by the 20th, then there became some concern. Okay, it's more than another week out. They only had so many supplies. So by all means, something's going on here. So a search party was formed, and they go out in search of these hikers. Now, the camp was found 6 days later on the 26th of February. And when they got to the camp, they did not find anybody, but they were able to follow footprints away from the camp. And they tracked these footprints and found the bodies of 5 members of the group, one of those being Dyatlov. 2 of those individuals in this group were stripped down to their underwear. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with hypothermia, that's not unusual. I believe it's referred to as paradoxical undressing, where when the body goes into late stages of hypothermia, the brain sends out the signal and believes that it's actually really warm. So they began to strip off more clothes, thinking they were warm, when in fact they'd hastened their own deaths from hypothermia. And one individual had a skull fracture. One did. And the doctors ruled that they had all died of hypothermia. So it's hard. It was believed that perhaps the skull fracture happened after death. So there's some uncertainty in that. Now, that was only 5 members of the group that they were able to discover, and they were all fairly close to the camp. They weren't that far. Matter of fact, it looked like as if 2 of those individuals were trying to get back to camp and had died in place at their camp when that happened. So we only have accounted 5. It took another 2 months before search parties would find the other 4 members of the party. Now, these individuals were buried under 13 feet of snow. They had all suffered traumatic deaths with broken ribs, and their skulls were crushed. Now, it was also determined that none of them showed any evidence of external defensive wounds. So it is widely believed that perhaps this group just died in an avalanche. They're buried under 13 feet of snow. It would seem to be one of the more logical explanations, except that the one individual, one female, was missing her tongue. So obviously it's a little unusual. They're not really sure, whether or not this was something that would happen. Being buried under 13 feet of snow, how would she have lost her tongue? Which then began to leave some question as to, okay, being buried under that much snow, could an animal have retrieved the tongue off of the corpse? Probably not. So did these injuries occur before they were buried under the snow? Or did they occur because of the snow? Well, if she lost her tongue, at any rate, this is where the mystery begins. So when the investigators are there and they're trying to figure out what happened, the government officials ruled that the group had died as a result of a compelling unknown force. And then the case was closed. And now keep in mind, this is Soviet-era Russia and Soviet Union, where everything was, kept very private. Disclosure was not something that occurred in any kind of thing. Lots of secrecy, things of that nature. And the fact that any kind of public record of these events occurring was squashed and hidden away, well then, it's not that unusual. And the fact is that it wasn't until after the fall of the Soviet Union and the gradual release of these records before we started to find out more of the story. There were some reports of it left behind, particularly from the survivor and from the locals, but this didn't really gain traction until release of these public documents by the Russian government after the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, interestingly enough, this area would be closed off to skiers and hikers for the next 3 years. So 3 more years would go by before the Soviet government would even allow anybody to be back there and be in those mountain regions in that area again. So, the question we have here is what really happened? Now, it would appear that the first 5 died of hypothermia. That seems likely, right, based on that. And the other obvious explanation for the other 4 would be an avalanche killed them. You know, those are the most mainstream and the most, at least, believed and accepted by most. However, there are some other concerns and possibilities based on some other strange evidence that I've yet to present. Another theory that has been hypothesized is that perhaps this was a result of the Mansi tribe. Mansi tribe was an indigenous tribe that lived in that area. Now, so it was believed that perhaps that might explain why the girl lost her tongue. And maybe this tribe attacked this group and removed her tongue. Now, that theory though has been challenged a bit because during this time, the Mansi tribe was in very good terms with Russians, and not only that, but they did not hunt in those mountain regions during that time of the year. The conditions were too brutal, and it did not even really support a whole lot of game life there. So for them to even be in that area would have been unusual. So, and there just doesn't appear to be any evidence that they were attacked by tribes, given that there was a lack of defensive wounds. So that theory has been largely squashed. Now this is where things get interesting. There's one piece of evidence that I haven't shared yet, and that's when the search and rescue teams got there and the government officials got there. They found something really unusual about all of the individuals in this group. But particularly 4 of the bodies, the 4 that had the severest injuries, showed signs of extremely high levels of radiation. Okay, well that is rather bizarre. Why would they have these extremely high levels of radiation? And there's no explanation. None of these individuals worked in any kind of government work in terms of working on a nuclear program. There was no reason for them to have had this exposure. What happened to these 4 individuals to have those extremely high levels of radiation? That is the unknown. That's one of the biggest unknowns. Now, interestingly enough, one other strange event has been reported in the area. Now, during the early part of their expedition, their group came across another group of geographers who were passing through the area as well. Now, they had spent like one evening together and then they moved on their separate ways. This group was interviewed, and during their interview, they reported seeing and observing these mysterious bright spheres in the sky in the area. UFOs, as many have come to argue. Now, not only them, but other people had also reported seeing these really bright flying spheres, glowing spheres in the sky in the months of February and March of that year. So that's when things get interesting. We have high levels of radiation and reports of flying spheres in the sky. Okay. So perhaps it's time we give that theory some consideration at least, right? One other odd theory that's been thrown out there about what happened to the individuals here is the abominable snowman, aka Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti. The question that, and the reason that this has gained some traction, is first off the rip in the tent. Now, this isn't like a pup tent. For those of you, you can look at pictures. This is a fairly good-sized tent. Something fairly large had ripped that hole out. Whether it was a person trying to get out or it was something else trying to get out remains uncertain. We don't know. And unfortunately, there's no way to know what tore out of that tent. But something tore out of the tent. And it has led some to speculate perhaps that it was an abominable snowman. Well, you ask yourself, well, why? Why would this be a plausible possibility? Well, first off, it's theorized that the crushing injuries that occurred to those 4 individuals would have possibly been occurred at the hands of an abominable snowman, something of incredible strength. The other consideration is that there were high numbers of sightings of the abominable snowman throughout Russia and Siberia. So that adds a little bit more to the mystery. And then the thing that kind of catches people off guard is one letter that was left in the diaries of the unfortunate group. The letter states, at least one particular line in this letter states, "We now know that the snowmen exist." Okay. Well, that's a little peculiar. Now the question that remains, were they joking? Were they writing this for fun? Were they referring to themselves as the abominable snowmen because they had been out there for days in these conditions? Or did they actually legitimately see the abominable snowman? So the mystery now has deepened. So the question there remains, is it so cut and dry that it was an avalanche and hypothermia that killed all 9 of the people in this group? Perhaps that still is the explanation. Unfortunately, it doesn't answer all the questions. It certainly doesn't answer in my opinion, the most puzzling piece of the puzzle is the radiation. Where did the radiation come from? Well, for many, that leads us right to the UFOs. It has led some to speculate that perhaps UFOs were in the area, had perhaps attempted to abduct these individuals, maybe had abducted some of the individuals. That might explain the crush injuries, the missing tongue. Perhaps these UFOs, these extraterrestrials aboard these crafts, perhaps they did some experimentation. The other 5 were able to escape, unfortunately dying from the conditions later at any rate. So that's a peculiar possibility when you throw in the number of sightings, the groups who were just through there claiming to see these objects, and then this mysterious radiation. And there has been a number of reports over decades now of people who claim to have been abducted by extraterrestrials aboard UFOs, an alien craft, coming back with higher levels of radiation. So that is why this story persists, and that's why that this mystery deepens, is that there's just pieces of evidence that we can't just forget. We can't just throw that away. If there was no radiation, I think that, okay, it'd be easy enough to just scratch all this off as, okay, hypothermia for the first 5, avalanche for the other 4, case closed. She lost her tongue. Who knows what happened with the tongue? It's peculiar nonetheless, but it's not in and of itself enough to be able to say, okay, something was going on there. But you throw in the missing tongue with the high levels of radiation, with the reported sightings by the other group as well as other people living not too far from that area, claiming to see bright flying orbs over the mountain range, then things become a little more complicated and less clear and much more mysterious. Now, the abominable snowman. Okay, so what we do know is that there have been numbers of reports of Yeti-type creatures, and something tore through the tent. Perhaps something was actually just a hallucinating human from hypothermia. That could certainly be explained as well. But what if, with all these sightings of the abominable snowman in the area, and even the written statement by someone in the group? Okay, well then that's a little more compelling. However, we can't throw out the possibility that perhaps they were joking or making a comment about themselves. So I'm not sure that the Bigfoot, the Yeti, the abominable snowman story really holds a whole lot of weight here either. I think that this is something that's, if I were to look at this, and if it's not a traditional explanation of avalanche and hypothermia, and we're looking at the unusual here, then I think we have to be looking at the connection between the radiation and the flying objects, the glowing spheres in the sky. That's when things get interesting. So, what do we make of this? Well, first off, we'll never really know for sure. Many of the documents involved have been destroyed. There's just no way to know. There is no way we'll ever have any kind of empirical evidence as to exactly what happened. There is no explanation for the radiation. There's really not a great explanation for the missing tongue either. The torn tent, that could possibly be explained. The undressed clothing, that could possibly be explained. There's explanations for all that are fairly conventional. But there is no conventional explanation for the radiation, at least none that is a legitimately strong possibility. And that in connection with the reports of the flying saucers, the UFOs, the glowing spheres, that is a little more compelling. And to me, if I'm looking at an explanation for the unusual aspects in this, then that's probably what the direction I'm leaning. But I don't know. It's a fascinating story. It is an amazing story, and it's a tragic story. And fortunately, one person was lucky enough to get sick and had to turn back. And we were able to get a little bit, at least the early parts of the story. But we'll never know the whole story, and we'll never have the details. No one lived to survive it, so we just don't have a way of being able to figure out what happened. Now, what I think is another underrated aspect of this story is the Mansi tribe's translation for the name of the Otorten Mountain. In Mansi tribe language, it translates to Mountain of the Dead. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think you look at something like that and you think, Mountain of the Dead. Well, there's a reason that the indigenous peoples call that the Mountain of the Dead. It's the same reason why that we have Devil's Valley and Devil's Lake and all these other features that are given these evil or dead or the devil connotations. It's because bad things have happened there. And there's a tradition and a history of bad things happening there. These names should not be ignored by any means. And the Mansi tribe wouldn't even go near that place, particularly during that season. But these unfortunate hikers looking for an adventure, well, they certainly found one by the looks of it. So, well, that is what I have for you today. Once again, for those of you who listen to the podcast live, I apologize for the inconvenience. Hopefully this will not happen again. I've only had this happen one other time, and I didn't think that this was going to be an issue again. I will continue to search and see what's going on with why that happened. Otherwise, once again, a reminder, check out, I'm going to be doing the live chat on the show's website, webofconspiracy.wix.com/webofconspiracy. I'll be on there tomorrow night, Saturday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll be taking your questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, the unusual, the unexplained. Feel free to either leave me a question early and then I'll answer it when I'm there, or jump in live and I will take all your questions and comments at that time. Be sure to check out the show's social media pages. I update those usually weekly, sometimes more than a few times a week, as well as occasionally sharing some things I think that are of interest. So, once again, thanks to all my listeners, as well as welcome to my new listeners from Stitcher. Thanks for coming. Hopefully you enjoy the show, and I will be back with you next Friday. Well, tomorrow night at 7 on the live chat, and then next Friday at noon. Until then, See ya.